UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, as women take on greater care demands at home during the pandemic, their jobs will be disproportionately affected by cuts and layoffs. Such impacts risk rolling back the already fragile gains made in female labour force participation. Now, women's economic empowerment is central to realising women's rights and gender equality. And as UN Women have said, as one definition of women's economic empowerment, but it is just one definition, that economic empowerment comprises women's ability to participate equally in existing markets, their access to and their control over productive resources like credit and land, for example, their access to decent work, and decent work, according to the ILO definition, is productive work for fair incomes, security in the workplace, as well as social protection for families, and freedom of workers to express their concerns and to organise. But women's economic empowerment also means control over their own time, lives, and bodies, and this agency and meaningful participation in economic decision-making, really at all levels, from the household level to international institutions. Now, the context for the need for women's economic empowerment and some of that backsliding that we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic in women's economic status is the net zero emissions, and it's the low carbon story globally. Now, as I'm sure you know, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change of 2015 committed its signatories to holding the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's around the 1850 to 1900 level of global temperature. And to pursue efforts to limit that global warming, that temperature increase, to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. And in fact, today, we're already sitting in a world which on average is 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial times. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is already finding significant and widespread losses and damages, even at 1.1 degrees of warming. This graph on the right of the slide shows in that light blue color, that light blue line on the graph, that the IPCC has modeled a scenario where it is possible to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but it's going to need urgent concerted action from across the world. And in fact, an authoritative scientific analysis by the called Climate Action Tracker Consortium, which is made up of climate analytics and the New Climate Institute, they've had a look at all the different climate policies and plans of governments across the world. And they reckon that if you add up all the policies, that's the actions that governments are actually taking, they're implementing right now, that those actions add up to still 2.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century above pre-industrial levels. So it's far from that target of 1.5 degrees. And even with the pledges and targets that governments have made, which are more aspirational and are sort of additional to what they're already doing, that would still deliver 2.1 degrees of global warming overall. So of course, then the climate context for women's economic empowerment is that it's time for very serious action to both avoid and cut greenhouse gas emissions, both in the near term as defined by 2030 and in the longer term. And there's a climate justice angle to that as well. And I've said, of course, avoiding greenhouse gas emissions for those countries who have actually hardly been emitting any whatsoever, so is a double bind for them. Well, it is deep cuts for the richer and more polluting countries. Now, in this context, you have a new and wonderful research program called Gender Equality in a Low Carbon World, GLOW, which is funded by Canada's International Development Research Centre, and CDKN, the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, is the knowledge translation partner for this initiative. Now, the GLOW research program aims to generate analysis and recommendations for policy and practice around these intersecting needs, these imperatives for women's economic empowerment on the one hand, and low carbon economic transitions on the other. The GLOW program is focused on low and middle income countries, those countries which are not historically responsible for most greenhouse gas emissions. And they're looking at what women's economic empowerment in green jobs and in this low carbon, climate resilient economy looks like in practice. There are 12 research projects, and you're going to hear from several of them today, from Malawi, from Senegal, from Bolivia, and also some commentary from Nepal. And as I've said, CDKN is a knowledge translation partner, helping all of them to amplify their findings and everything they have to say. It's also worth noting, though, that GLOW is a very new research program, and it's only been going for a few months. So what you're going to hear from today's speakers are their views on the opportunities and the specific country level contexts for women's economic empowerment in green economies in their countries and regions. It's going to be another 2 years or so until they have really sort of mature research findings. So we may look forward to a commission on the status of women meeting in about 2 years' time, when they'll have more perhaps forceful recommendations to share with all of you. But nonetheless, I encourage you to visit idrc.ca, to just put in the search box gender equality in a low carbon world, and find out more about the objectives of the program and all of the 12 projects involved in it. Now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the first of the project speakers. They are Dr. Jessica Kampanje Piri, a lecturer in social work and a social anthropologist specializing in food security and gender at the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Malawi. And she is going to co-present with her colleague, Dr. Joyce Njoloma, an associate scientist for agroforestry systems at World Agroforestry, or ICRAF, also in Malawi. It's my pleasure, Jessica, to hand to you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and welcome to everyone from all over the world. I welcome you to this side event of our meeting today, and our topic of presentation is prioritizing options for women empowerment and resilience in food tree value chain in Malawi, in short POWER project, which is part of the GLOW initiative, as Mairi has introduced. And I'll present the first part of the presentation, and my colleague Joyce will take on to provide the nitty-gritty details of the POWER project. But before I hand over to her, I just want to give you a brief context of why thinking of empowerment in a low-carbon context is important in terms of Malawi. And for that, I'll just give you a brief introduction of why is this important. So Malawi, like any other development country, we have an economic gap between the poor and the rich. And over 80% of our population rely on smallholder farming, and where about 65 to 75% of urban poor also rely in informal market livelihoods. And relatively a larger, or you can say smaller population of the urban population, amounting 15 to 20%, might be able to afford livelihood essentials, especially during pandemics like COVID and other climate-related disasters. And that's quite a small proportion of the population that Malawi has, as you can appreciate. So, and then further to that, according to World Bank, a recent publication, they've also further found out that about 60% of the employed of women and 44% of men are employed within the agriculture sector, which is the largest sector in Malawi. And about 25% of these population are managed by men, where about they gain higher yields as compared to men, which as compared to women, which means that men have an upper hand in terms of economic leverage than women. So female wage workers earn at least 64 cents lower than the wages that men get for every dollar that men get. So this is something also you can appreciate, that the women empowerment or women's status is really something that is worth noting in Malawi, even if that there is a lot of initiatives that are going on to empower women. There's still this gap that needs to be addressed. So the gender gap in agriculture productivity for these women is due to many factors, but some of which are land issues, lower access to farm labor, inferior access to improved agriculture inputs and technology, low levels of literacy, among other things. So one of the things that we were asked to look at is how then, looking at that context, how then these the shocks like COVID-19 and shocks like climate change or climate crisis affect women in Malawi. Appreciating the context that I've just recently shared, you can also, you and me can also agree that men, women, boys and girls are exposed to different climatic risks and their impacts in a differentiated manner. And this is based on their livelihoods, activities and capacities especially in the agriculture sector in our context, that is where the population is much more congested. So the adverse impact of shocks like climate change really affect a larger population of the country, most of which are women, and the most vulnerable, the disabled and children who are in this sector. Women are also very much less economically empowered politically, and the legal muscle that they have is also something that left out behind as compared to men. And despite growing recognition of the differentiated vulnerabilities that we have already pointed out, they still, the women still experience very differentiated income levels, and that's also, they affect the development and environmental sustainability efforts in a very critical way, because women still play very much critical roles in fending for their families, trying to find out food for their families, and the general livelihood of their families. So women still are playing a critical role, not only in food security issues, but also in taking care of the environment. Hence, not recognizing the role that these women are playing in terms of their critical contribution, but also how they're affected when these aspects are affected, is something that we need to discuss here. So women are still less able to cope and are more exposed to the adverse effects of the changing climate and pandemics such as COVID. So for instance, in Malawi, we see that during the pandemic, the informal sector was very much affected, especially when they proposed interventions to do lockdowns was proposed, because most of the people were relying in informal markets, as we have pointed out. So not many would be able to afford stocking so many stocks and put them in the fridge for a lockdown that might be maybe take a long time like 2-3 months, because they have to rely on ganyu labor, which is like temporary labor for everyday need that they have to have every day. So you can see that much as the population, 20% can afford to be able to afford their day-to-day access to food, but most part of the population, this would be very something that they couldn't even risking death if it went into that direction. So some of these things are very much critical for interventions that are to be applied in the context of Malawi. So how well are low carbon goals as well as gender equality mainstreamed into economic development policies in Malawi? With regards to clean energy sources and technologies, women's role, as I have already emphasized, cannot be underestimated, as they are mainly responsible for ensuring energy supplies and food security issues at household level. So carbon storage or sequestration is essential to highlight that the women play a very critical role in agriculture and forest management, among other things. And this is also recognized in policy initiatives in Malawi, which my colleague Joyce will go into details on how Malawi has taken these up initiatives of incorporating the role of women in different policies that are to do with carbon sequestration, as well as energy and food security issues. And also, as a matter of continuation, it's important that decision makers and development partners all over, those that are concerned with issues of Malawi and maybe similar development countries like Malawi, at all levels, need to integrate gender perspectives into planning, financing, and implementation of climate change responses and disaster mitigation and management at all levels and across related sectors, because of the critical role these women are really playing in these sectors, as I already highlighted. And bridging the gap in this way to ensure agriculture productivity would mean that women would have to have equal access to key productive inputs, agriculture inputs, farm labor, and expanding access to education and digital technology, just to mention but a few. And this is also what we are trying to do in our project that I now hand over to my colleague Joyce, who will explain exactly what we are doing to ensure that women are empowered, but also contributing to low carbon contribution in the whole world, as specifically also in Malawi. Thank you. Joyce, please.
Thank you. Basically, just to bring in a perspective, say the project we're doing is best to empower women. So we had to understand the perspective of green economy. And this has been defined by so many other institutions, the UN, FAO, and just to give us an indication to say, we are looking at an economy that aims at reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcity, and that aims for sustainable development without degrading the environment. So we were actually entrusted, or we actually were too sure to say we will make a better contribution by looking at the areas that are mentioned here, and that when we're looking at the project we proposed and comparing it to low carbon issues and resource efficient, we found that it was most suited to look at that particular aspect and then contributing to gender equality in low carbon world. So as indicated, this is not like starting from ground zero. ICRAF has been working in the areas that were selected, helping farmers to plant trees, and these are different trees, one of which are the fruit trees. So we also look at other type of trees, like fertilizer trees, fuel trees, fodder trees. But in this particular project, we're looking at fruit trees, mangoes, oranges. We also have guavas, and then there's a nut tree, that's macadamia, also in one area where farmers are able to produce that. So the focus basically is to ensure that farmers are able to diversify their production. And in this particular aspect, we are actually prioritizing women's options. What is it that women can do to be resilient, to be empowered economically with the resources that they have available? So as indicated earlier, we are going to be looking at mango, fruits, oranges, guavas, and macadamia to ensure that the women that are participating in production of these fruits and nuts, they are able to manage them and then also be able to bring income in their households. As indicated, we are looking at food trees. Suffice to say that we can actually call them fruits and nut trees, but in general, food producing trees, and that these are a low carbon alternative that have potential of generating multiple benefits. And these benefits actually include household income. As earlier indicated, farmers should be able to sell the fruits, should be able to sell the nuts, and after managing them, they should be able to fetch an income for their household. Adding to that, paramount had been that it's supposed to improve their nutrition. We know that fruits and nuts, they have high quality vitamins that supports the health of the household. So that's also part of it. And then as the trees grow, as my colleague had indicated, say there's carbon sequestration that is actually another service that is provided. And then as these are grown together with other crop fields, they actually moderate temperatures and also reduce soil erosion, and that's increasing productivity of the companion crop. So we are hopeful that when farmers are actually taken through, build their capacities in how to manage these, they should be able to actually be economically worthy, even under several other pandemics that may come or that we are going through. But with the indicating is to say that we will be specifically looking at aspects that what is it that a woman needs to grow in this particular sector of food tree production or fruit tree production or nut tree production, and that should be able to be channeled through proper policies, and that women farmers can actually be empowered to go a long way in actually fending or looking after their households, even when there's a number of inequalities. But this should actually bring out what are those inequalities that we can look at. But it also suffice to say, I must indicate to say that we are not saying that the COVID-19 is the one that has brought in these inequalities, but it just gravitates the state in which the women find themselves. And so we will be looking at those in relation to the current pandemics and then future pandemics to come, and that farmers should be resilient and then be able to to manage the risks that come. Just to indicate to say that we have policies existing, and so the work that we have proposed and we are to undertake is actually guided by the policies that are available, and it will also contribute to the same through policy briefs. Just to mention a few, we have the National Gender Policy, and that this policy actually strengthens the mainstreaming and empowering of women at all levels, at workplace, at the household level. And so we are too sure that whatever work we're going to do is going to support or is being supported, but we are going to unearth some of the gaps that are still missing that needs to be looked into to ensure that women are well empowered and that they can actually do a lot more within their capacities. We have the National Agriculture Policy, and that one I'm flagging it out because it's actually a policy that ensures that production is improved, productivity is improved, and real farm incomes are improved. And the Power Project is actually tallying in those particular aspects of productivity. And so we expect farm incomes to improve, and especially those that are going to empower women. And as well as the National Resilience Strategy also looks at food and nutrition, and we're actually looking at the Power Project improving the nutrition well-being of the households that are going to participate. And to a larger scale, if these women are empowered and all other farmers are empowered, and that they sell these other excess production, then we're looking at a nation that's going to be food and nutritionally secured with good, nutritious fruits and nuts. And then we also have the National Agricultural Investment Policy Plan that also supports productivity. Likewise, the National Climate Change Management Policy, it also talks about how to become resilient. And we are contributing to the resilience that farm households are going to be. So just in summary, to say that the Power Project is going to bring in the power tool, that's an empowerment dimension. So giving power or ensuring that women have power to access power to do or control their resources. And so we expect that the Power Project will put in more effort to identify the key policy-related bottlenecks and the incentives that can actually enhance women's efficient participation in targeted fruit and nut tree value chains, among other aspects that they're going to be participating in. And so we are going to be contributing or supporting the aim to accelerate equal participation of women, including the young women, marginalized groups in decision-making on what they should do and how they can do it. And we will also be able to provide technical assistance to strengthen mechanisms that advance gender equality and women empowerment in governance processes. And this will be through trainings and policy briefs as indicated earlier on. So coming this far, it's marking the end of the presentation for the Malawi project. And I would want to thank you, and that's the last slide, to thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Joyce, and also to Jessica. That was an utterly inspiring vision of how you're going to be working with Malawian women to truly empower them and in a very integral way that is going to address all aspects of resilience as well as climate change mitigation and economic development. So audience members, please store up your questions for Joyce and Jessica, because you'll have an opportunity to ask them after the presentations have finished. Now we're going to pivot to another continent, the continent of Latin America, of South America, and to the country of Bolivia, where my colleague Lucky Anderson, the Executive Director of SDSN Bolivia, is going to tell you a bit about her team and her team's project and vision in a different sector, is a vision for a sustainable and gender inclusive tourism sector. Over to you, Lucky.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very happy to be here to tell you a bit about our recently started project called Tourism as an Engine of Sustainable and Gender Inclusive Development in Bolivia. And I want to show you some of the first results that we have that signal that this sector indeed has a lot of potential. So this graph shows Bolivia's 4 main export sectors before the pandemic. And Bolivia has always been a mining country, and it's still our main export product. And it brings in a lot of foreign currency revenue to the country, but it causes tremendous amounts of contamination, not so much carbon emissions, but water contamination. Bolivia is the second biggest importer of mercury in the world, and all that mercury is used in gold mining, and it ends up in the rivers and the fish and the people who eat the fish in the Amazon. So that's a really troubling sector. Also, it almost exclusively creates jobs for men, and it's kind of bad jobs, dangerous jobs, harmful jobs, but they do create a lot of income for these men. Our second biggest export sector is natural gas, which is kind of a good product to export. It brings in huge amounts of revenue for the government because half of sales is paid in taxes and goes right to the government to pay all the expenses of running a government. It does not create any jobs really, or hardly any jobs, neither for men nor for women, since it's just a hole in the ground and a pipeline to another country, and it goes almost by itself. So the problem with that is that we're running out of gas, and we've invested in exploration the last several years and haven't really found anything. So that's worrying, and we cannot even comply with our current export contracts. So that's running out, and the government, to replace those revenues, is betting on the agro-industrial sector. So that would be export of mainly soybeans and meat, which is a disaster for the environment as well, because we burn a lot of forest to make room for agricultural expansion. So Bolivia is one of the world's highest deforesters in per capita terms, and yeah, it's just a total tragedy. The fourth sector is tourism, and that's the one that seems most promising because it does not really cause any environmental adverse effects. It generates a lot of jobs, it generates a lot of foreign revenues. And before the pandemic, it was the sector that was growing by far the fastest in the country, like 3 times more than all other exports. And in terms of GDP growth, it was also twice as fast as all the other sectors. So there was a lot of potential in that. And one of the excellent things about the tourism sector is that it's mainly women employed there, and women actually earn about 72% of all income in that sector, which is in sharp contrast to the other sectors like mining, it's 5%, natural gas, it's 11%, and agriculture is 29%. So it's actually the only sector that we could find that women earn more than their 50% share that would indicate equality. So we think that if we could move or put more emphasis on tourism, that would automatically help women. And it's not just the women earn such a big share of income, not just because there are more women working in that sector, but also because they actually occupy high positions. In the next slide, we can see of all the tourism enterprises that have been created, formal enterprises that have been created and registered in Bolivia over the last 3 decades. The last decade, more were actually registered by women, so female legal representatives, which are likely to be the owners. And you can see just how the number of enterprises registered by women have increased over time. So that's a very promising development. Of course, the problem was with the pandemic, there was a humongous drop in tourism activities. Tourist arrivals dropped by 90%, and next slide shows that tourism revenues also dropped by almost 90%. So this is a graph that shows about Bolivia's climate strategy, and especially emissions reductions. So according to the latest national commitments, Bolivia wants to reduce emissions a lot, and they've analyzed where they can reduce. And even if we do only renewable energy and electrifies transport heavily the next decade, reductions in that sector are really small. But we can reduce emissions enormously, like 1,000 million tons if we reduce deforestation in Bolivia to 0 by 2030, which is the commitment. But that completely requires that the government changes its strategy of agricultural expansion and export, and we need to provide an alternative, and we think tourism is a most viable alternative. Some people say that tourism is carbon intensive, but that's not really the case in Bolivia. This paper called The Carbon Footprint of Global Tourism by Lenson and others have calculated the carbon footprint for each country. And Bolivia is so close to 0 that you cannot see it really on the axis. And it's slightly more than Angola and Yemen. So I think you can safely assume that it's very close to 0. And that's because a lot of the tourists arriving in Bolivia, they come by bus from Peru, and they are backpackers, and they go like bicycle on Death Road and other very, very low carbon activities, very green. It's very nature oriented, our tourism. And so it just by nature has a low carbon footprint. Even if we vastly increase the quality of tourists or the spending of tourists, get some people who are not the poorest backpackers, the carbon emissions from tourism would still only be like 1/10 of emissions from agriculture per dollar of exports. So it is really a very, very promising sector. And that is why we are setting up a Bolivian observatory on sustainable tourism, not just to investigate the potential of tourism and try to convince the government that this is a sector worth supporting, but also to understand the obstacles that we are facing for this sector to grow, and strategies to overcome these obstacles. And we're trying to kind of unite all the efforts, because a lot of other institutions also think this is a good idea. So we're trying to unite efforts to promote this sector through our observatory called Orbita. To everybody. I will be available for questions if anybody has later.
Oh, I'm sure that so many audience members do have questions. That was fascinating, very thought-provoking, Lucky. Thank you very much indeed. So next up, we have Laure Toll, Dr. Laure Toll, who is Director of Research at IPAR Senegal.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some discussions that we have been having within our think tank, IPAR. Since the beginning of this pandemic. We always discussed about the effect of this pandemic on the most vulnerable, and how do we build back better. So for this talk, I will share on a new project that was funded by IDRC on energy transition in the agricultural sector to empower women, especially women working in the subsector of horticulture. It's very difficult to say in English, and I would say even in French. I wanted to start this presentation by talking about the challenges that women faced in Africa. But I've seen that my colleagues from Malawi have already talked about it in terms of their involvement in the economic development. There are a lot of challenges, but I wanted to talk more on 4 of them. The first one is social challenges for women. the social role that African women have in their society most of the time leads to their exclusion from the labor market. This is also linked to the challenge of education. We know that illiteracy rates in the sub-Saharan Africa is the highest in the world, and women represent 2/3 in terms of illiteracy. The third challenge is land and land property. Even though in many African countries we can say that in the law men and women are equals in terms of property rights, we have numbers saying that only 2% of African land are owned actually by women. And this leads us to the final challenge, employment, women's employment. When women, regarding all these challenges, when they have access to work, we can still see important gender disparities, gender gaps. In Malawi, they were talking about 63% difference between men and women's and men's work. In Senegal, it's 66%. It is still a huge gap. Because we have been working a lot in Senegal, I wanted to have a focus on the Senegal country. During COVID, like many other countries, multiple measures have been taken to mitigate the effect of the restrictions, mainly the travel restriction. We also had travel ban between cities and regions of Senegal. We had fiscal measures with injections of more than $2 billion in the Senegalese economy to reduce budget deficit, government debt to local enterprise. So $2 billion, that may seem not that much money, but for a developing country like Senegal, injecting $2 billion within 1 year, it's a huge amount, and it has been unseen before this COVID pandemic. The Senegalese government also take social measures with the emergency food aid, and this program totaled more than $100 million for 100 million households. This food aid program was dedicated to the most vulnerable households in Senegal. But when we looked at all these measures, none of them was targeting specifically women. We have been working on the effect of COVID-19 on women in the agricultural sectors. And in this recent work, we looked at the effect of this COVID restriction on women in the agricultural sector. And what we saw is that most of the women was affected. When we were looking at horticultural sector, meaning producing garden vegetables. 100% of the women that we interviewed, 100%, all of them said that they were negatively affected by the COVID-19. 100% of the women in the fish transformation were affected. A little bit less in the poultry sector. I think it was around 87. But this is very important. A lot of women in the agricultural sector were impacted, and when we compare the women and men, women were more affected by COVID-19 than men. And we did not see any specific measures for them. So we've seen that, like many other countries, tourism was impacted by COVID. But in Senegal, the country that was the sector that was the most affected by the pandemic was the agricultural sector. And when we have a country where agricultural is seen as an engine for development, we really need to look at this impact and how we can do better for the future. We targeted the horticultural sector because it is a really important building block of the food systems. And what we've seen is that the pandemic has largely affected the food system, especially when we had food systems that were relying a lot on importation instead of local production. So for our project, we decided to look specifically on the horticultural sector. This is a booming sector in West Africa, with 16% of the GDP in Senegal, a little bit less in Guinea, and a majority of women working in this value chain, from the production to the transformation and to the consummation of these products. In the horticultural system, the irrigation costs were is the place where we have the most expenditure. Between 45 and 20% of the total cost of the production are for irrigation, depending on what you are growing. And women are the most vulnerable to this increased work because they are the one doing most of the time the watering. So for us, we've seen irrigation and in the agricultural sector, especially garden vegetables production, as a good opportunity for a greener and more inclusive economy development. So the question is, how can we use green energy for household and production in our developing economies? It is known that energy poverty is an obstacle to any economic growth and any economic development. In sub-Saharan Africa, 680 million people, and the majority of them are in rural areas, lack energy. How do we build more shock resilience and sustainable economic model? In the two countries that we have targeted, Senegal and Guinea, we have seen an important political will. In Senegal, there are very important programs for electrification in the rural areas, where more than 20% are set to be renewable energy. There is also very recently discussion on a new strategic plan for the development of the country, and this plan is called the Green Senegal Emerging Plan. So there's a real political will for greening the development, but is it really green, or is it only greenwashing? In Guinea, for example, they are using renewable energy as one of their targets for their NDCs. But again, talking about energy, talking about development, talking about climate, there is no specific discussion on the access to energy for women. We know that from different studies, most of them, I have to say, in Southeast Asia, that the access to energy for women can increase their participation to the labor market, their participation to the human capital development, and also income generating activities. However, in West African country, there is no policies, there is no program for renewable energy, green energy for women. In the case of our project, we make the bet that using solar energy in agricultural production with products that are focusing on women, targeting women. I talk about solar products that are easily used by women, financing vehicles that promote women, training for women. We make the bet that this type of program, crafting, helping Senegalese and Guinean government to craft this type of program, can greatly reduce women arduousness of work, their work time compared to manual work, that is quite obvious, but also increase energy efficiency compared to gas pumps, increase their incomes greatly, and reduce also greenhouse gas emission from gas pumps by more than 95%. So these are our ambitions for this project, and I think that soon we will be able to give more results and share them with you. If you need more information, you can contact me or contact Maram Cissé. Maram Cissé she's a researcher. She's an expert in gender studies, and she's the researcher coordinating this project for us, IPAR. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of my talk, this is a work that is jointly done by IPAR and CECI. CECI is a Canadian NGO. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laure. We benefited very much from your insights there. That was amazing. Thanks. And we had some nice pictures at the end too. So that brings to an end our formal presentations. I'm now going to hand over to Mani, who has joined us from Nepal. Hi, Mani. He's with the South Asian Institute for Advanced Studies. And I think you're going to give us some informal reflections now, maybe picking up on some of the threads that you've heard from our other speakers, comparing it to the situation of women's economic empowerment in Nepal. What are you thinking about these intersecting issues?
Okay, thank you, Mary. Thank you very much for inviting me as well in this workshop, very important, very useful for us in Nepal as well. Because I was not been able to share with you some policy reviews or the works, some insights from our groundwork, because currently we are focusing on our field work primarily because Nepal is going through local government election in May 13. So in a couple of weeks, we will have very restricted mobility within the country. So we wanted to capture this opportunity to finish some of the field works and build rapport with the stakeholders, collect some data, so that we can maximize our time in analyzing some of the data from the field during the election period. So many people, many colleagues are in the field as well. So that's why I just wanted to listen from other colleagues from other countries and learn also from their experiences and see whether there are some lessons to draw for Nepal. Okay. Let me begin. I think Nepal, like in other countries, climate change had a very dispersed, proportionate effect on women's lives and their situation further aggravated by COVID-19, this type of pandemic. many women, more than men, they lost jobs. Many agriculture and forestry entrepreneurs, they had to close their enterprises, mainly women. And because of pandemic and restricted mobility, their care work within the household also increased. So their leisure time was reduced, their health situation worsened. These are the reported reported evidences from Nepal. But it also, we think that this has also some positive opportunities created to women farmers and entrepreneurs that we work with. Particularly during the pandemic, many women started using social media. They had to purchase smartphones to be connected with their near and dear ones. Who are not within their town. Okay, so they had to communicate with that. That is an opportunity we would like to build on in this project, so that we can we can increase the access of information and market to women through digital, creating the digital platforms for them, so that they can get the access to information as well as the better connection with the market. But what we also see in other countries is that because of different reasons, their capabilities of negotiation with the market, and also the confidence because of the security situation, they cannot leave their houses for longer hours because of their remaining tasks, care tasks at home. These are some of the issues. Because of that, as we move at the higher nodes of value chains of agriculture and forestry, the participation of women in those nodes is significantly decreased. So we are aiming to increase that space for women at higher level of value chains. We would like to work with local governments and the market forces and other associations that are supporting this type of initiatives to increase the political and other spaces for women in that value chain. We also see that this opportunity, because the local government elections are in May. So after that, we can closely work with the newly elected leaders and develop some of the policies and strategies with them, which could be applicable for next 5 years or so. Yeah, that we see as an opportunity for policy making and influencing policy on the ground. We also have another, I think in many countries that be the case. We also have JC policies in place in agriculture and forestry ministries, which we can capitalize to implement on the ground as well, and make the entire system of agriculture and forestry value chain more inclusive and women friendly. As discussed by Jessica and Joyce, we are also working in identifying the gender-based constraints at different levels. And once we identify them together with the women and other actors, we would like to go for changing them, addressing the challenges, those constraints, through action research mode. That is one of the approaches that we are taking in Nepal within our project. So we will be looking forward to working with others and learning from others from Africa and Latin America that are working in similar areas. I also found very useful that by creating additional opportunities of supplying energy and other facilities to women, that will significantly increase their leisure time, and also the decreased amount of their time in harnessing water or other resources that they should be going otherwise. So we are also thinking to link that climate-friendly energy system in place for irrigation and other opportunities, so that women can benefit additional time and resources for them to move ahead and use that for more productive resources generation. That's all I wanted to share from Nepal, and it was really nice to talk, and really nice to hear from Lucky, and also from Jessica, Joyce, and Laure. Okay, thank you, Mari, for this opportunity as well.
Thank you so much, Manny. That was really insightful, and I'm picking up the common thread coming through about the importance of reducing the arduous nature of women's chores and work, so they can have more productive time. Yes, very well stated indeed. Now I see that Laure has posed a question for her fellow speakers. So may I please encourage everyone listening in to put their questions for the speakers in the chat box. But why don't we start off with Laure's question, which is the mitigation of carbon emissions on the agenda in your countries? How is it implemented? So should we maybe first go to Malawi? Jessica or Joyce, would you like to take up that question? I know you showed the policy landscape slide mentioning Malawi's resilience and agricultural strategies and so forth. Is carbon emissions reduction one of the national policies there?
Yes, let me take that one.
Yes, please.
I would say yes, mitigation on carbon emissions is one of the, is on the agenda of the national agenda for the policies that we have and the drivers that we actually are doing. In mitigating for that, we're actually saying we have had forests that were quite so rich, and because of opening up of new lands, burning, and normal natural fires, we have actually contributed to the increase in carbon emissions. But now we actually are saying, how do we improve on that? One way of that is through tree planting, and we normally have a season of that. And then one other also contributing factor is the use of charcoal, so from wood. And so that is being reduced. And to reduce that, those who cannot manage are actually encouraged to use other cook stoves that would actually reduce carbon emissions and the like. But also in our farming systems, I'll talk on my part as an agroforester, we actually encourage the planting of various or different tree species alongside other crops, and that also entails that we should be able to sequester a little more carbon, and that reduces also the emissions that come up with the agricultural production. And then encouraging use of manure and other forms of organic material instead of chemical fertilizers. So apparently the chemical fertilizer is already going up high, and so not many can afford. So use of alternative organic material, manure, is actually envisaged to actually contribute to the reduction of carbon emissions. So I would say yes, in brief, as I've indicated so, but there are many more other interventions that the government is putting in place, other institutions are putting in place, and so many other stakeholders trying to bring down the carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer. That was brilliant. Why don't we move on perhaps to the next question, which is from Aryan Dahan. He's actually our colleague in IDRC in Ottawa. Good day, Aryan. He's asking, or he's saying rather, thank you so much for the excellent presentations. I would love to hear more about the commitments to addressing gender gaps, given also that this was often absent during the pandemic. What are the government and others' commitments to address gender in climate action, and in particular, how will your research contribute? So for example, and Lucky, maybe we could start with you for this one. In SDSN's observatory work, how will you pragmatically reach out to and involve women who are working in the tourism sector, and you want to get them sort of, even more productively employed in sustainable tourism? For you, Mani, in Nepal, how does action research come about? So over to Bolivia first.
Okay, thank you. The observatory has many different lines of work, not only to convince the central government that they should focus more on tourism, but also work with local governments and work directly with tourism enterprises. So for example, one of our lines of work is to train small tourism businesses run mainly by women in new digital technologies used in tourism, which is not very well known and much used in Bolivia so far. So that's one way to empower women directly. We also plan to do support 25 students from different lines of study to do research on tourism, sustainable development, and gender, to promote more work in this area and get more people interested, and it will help our research project just to get many more people working on these issues. But really, it's important for us to try to convince the government, because the government does not very highly value or focus on reducing emissions. In the first NDC of Bolivia, they completely ignored the mitigation part of the plan and only focused on adaptation. In the second, which was supposed to be presented in Glasgow, we did take into account mitigation strategies and analyzed it with like 5 different ministries. But in the end, some other ministry must have blocked it because it has still not been published. So there's a kind of a power struggle within the government. Some ministries are interested in reducing emissions and getting more sustainable development, but others just want to earn more money for the country. So it's a struggle.
Oh, that was a description of realpolitik from Bolivia there. Thank you, Lucky. So Mani, we'll come to your view, and then after Mani, I will ask you, Laure, also about how change happens in policy in Senegal. But Mani, first of all, Nepal, how does change happen?
I think I would like to talk about our project and how we would like to go with that first, because we are first working to identify gender-based constraint at different places, at policy level, at project program implementation level. Policies are also emanated at local government, provincial government, and federal government level. So we would like to first identify those constraints, gender-based constraints. Many of them we anticipate that they are coming from social norms and values, because Nepal is also similar to India, very hierarchical caste system. They have different, that's the hierarchy is there. Now it also has some, it is also intersected with gender and class as well. So it's very complicated one. we would like to first understand and identify those constraints. And wherever it fits and emanated from, we would like to intervene at that level so that we can contribute better to change the gender discrimination or inequality that exists in that agriculture and forestry value chains. That is, we would like to work on. For that purpose, we have at the local level, at the community level, we have farmers field school that we would like to reuse, that has been used in other places and very familiar tool. We also have more inclusive and derivative forums at local government level. We will facilitate that process and engage women farmers and entrepreneurs with local government at that interface, and try to change the local government policies and programs to make them more gender friendly and empowering ones. So many activities local government currently are supporting for women related activities. They are very traditional ones, giving some training, providing some tokenistic things. So we would like to change that and make more gender responsive thing, okay? At the provincial and national level policies also, we would like to work with some women entrepreneur associations that operate at that level, and try to change the policies at that level if they are constraining to women entrepreneurs and bridging in order to bridge the gap. That is what we would like to plan for. And because we are at the formative stage of this federalism within Nepal, so we would like to give more emphasis at local government level, empower them. They are very close to the people as well, so we would like to maybe spend more time and energy and resources at their level, and make them more gender responsive, gender friendly in terms of policies and programs. Okay, that is our plan at this stage. For mitigation thing, I think this is very small. We have one NTFP, non-timber forest product related site where we would like to also experiment one species, the winter green species, and expand that to larger areas, so that because mostly women are the ones who are involved in collecting those resources from forests. If they are available within the marginal land within their vicinity, maybe their time will be saved. They will earn more money, and through other resources, other support programs also. We would like to empower them, capacitate them, and let them so that they can claim their own rights and position within that community system, collective action scenarios. That is what we are planning in Nepal in this project. Okay.
Thank you so much. Clearly a very diverse set of activities, and in direct answer to Ariane's question, yes, there is a major gender gap and there's no silver bullet to solve it. Yeah. It really is going to take this kind of diverse engagement and partnership across many different levels of government and institution and community, as Mani has said. Thank you. So Laure, back to Senegal, and let's ask you the question then, is there a gender gap in climate action? Senegal and Guinea, pardon me, and also your colleague Maram's question here for access to green energy, how to convince the government, how to convince the state. Maybe a few more thoughts from you.
Thank you for these very difficult questions. Research can be difficult, but using this research to influence policy or change this policy is always the most difficult part. In this particular project, we decided to I would say, attack the decision makers from different angles. We have activities directed to them, focused on them, with the sharing of results, policy, policy brief, the usuals directed to the policy makers. We have also been very careful in the way we were targeting the policymakers. Sometimes it is not about the ministry that you target, but the specific agency or the specific individuals that you know that can push forward the messages. So we are well informed on how it is working in Guinea and in Senegal, and we've targeted specific decision makers. For example, in our steering committee, we have the Senegalese Agency on Renewable Energy, and one of their director was at our methodological workshop, and he was very interested in some of the studies that we are planning to do, and he's looking forward for the results because he wants to use them in their next strategic plan. So this is an example. The other thing is that we did not started the project from our lab or our research institution. We work together with the decision makers. Before we send the proposition, we had a lot of meetings and discussion with Ministry of Women to try to better target what they were what they needed in terms of data, in terms of analysis and questions. And what came really strongly from them is that they need some analysis on how to promote finance for women, for them to access this type of technology. This is an example on how we targeted our decision makers. The other thing is that we did not only target them, we also target some researchers and policy makers from outside our West African region, because we know that sometimes they can have some influence in on our government. So we targeted, for example, Farm Foundation. They are working a lot on ecological energy transition, and they will work with us on some analysis on the energy transition in farms, and I'm sure that they will be able to use this data and put them back in the discussion at the international level for West Africa. And thirdly, we will work, and we are working with the farmers' organization at the really local level, because we know that these farmers' organization can have a lot of power in terms of advocacy, and they can really push forward the policies if they are convinced that it is to their advantage. So we have these three strategies, and we hope that with that we will achieve something within the 30 months of the project. Sometimes it is also a question of time. Maybe the project can be finished, but we need to continue the discussion with the decision makers to make sure that we have an adequacy between our research and their needs in terms of policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask my colleagues now to put up a Zoom poll for you all to participate in. So just before we close this very productive workshop at the bottom of the hour, we're going to ask you to fill out a few simple questions about yourselves and whether you found the event today useful. Also, I've gone ahead and I've put email address in the chat box, enquiries@cdkn.org. And if you have got other sort of follow-up thoughts, or you want to get in touch with any of the speakers after the event, please just write to us at inquiries@cdkn.org. Put the subject as GLOW in the subject line and we'll make sure that it gets to the right place. And there's a nice message from Mani also in the chat box. So over to my colleagues Zizipho and Nonalewi in Cape Town. Let's see if we can get the Zoom poll going. I also want to actually give a special thanks to the technical team in Cape Town. They have a public holiday in South Africa today, and they've very kindly been working overtime to make this event happen. So sincere thanks to both Zizipho and Nonalewi there, and to Emma, who has been working hard on communications. And if you also follow us at CDKN Network on Twitter, you'll be able to see various highlights of today's event, and you could help to promote further. Otherwise, it just therefore leaves me with the pleasant task of thanking once again our amazing speakers today. They were Joyce Njoloma at World Agroforestry in Malawi, Jessica Kampanje Piri of Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Malawi, Lucky Anderson, Executive Director of SDSN Bolivia, Laure Tall, Director of Research, IPAR Senegal, and then our commentator Mani Rambanjadi, Senior Research Fellow at South Asia Institute of Advanced Studies, Nepal, who have all given you an amazing insight into the complexities of, in practice, trying to address women's economic empowerment in low carbon transitions, but the amazing opportunities as well. And I think you would agree with me that these ladies and gentlemen are ones to watch, and I think as their research, their action research unfolds over the next 2 years or so, they're going to be making a lot of positive change. Thanks to you all. Thanks for joining.